Hello, everybody. Welcome to CripChat, your weekly podcast for everything disability. Today, I have with me Jonathan Shar,
Hello.
myself, David D, Ibby D, and today we have a special guest, Elena Katrakis, gonna be talking about the importance of carers in our everyday life. Please like and share. If you got any comments, please put them in the comment box. Over to you, Ibby.
David, thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome to CripChat, your weekly podcast on everything disability. Thank you for joining us today. Hello. How are you?
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Oh, good. Thank you, John. Now let's get to the topic for today. So we're talking about carers and what that's all about. So the value of carers' contribution to our society. So Helena, tell us a bit about yourself and the work that you do at Carers in South Wales.
My name's Elena Katrakis, and I've been at Carers New South Wales for 18 years as the CEO. Carers New South Wales does a lot of work around, we're the peak organisation for all informal family carers across New South Wales. We work with the other state and territory carer organisations, and we're a member of Carers Australia. So we sort of have a statewide reach. And we do a lot of work in policy and advocacy and research. We also do service delivery to carers directly. So we are one of a number of carer gateway providers across the country and one of 4 carer gateway providers in New South Wales. So we deliver carer gateway services in the Central Coast, Hunter, New England and North Coast parts of New South Wales. We have a young carer program, so young carers under the age of 25. We support and do some work with young carers. We also do some employment programs around supporting informal family and friend carers to balance work and care. We accredit carer-friendly workplaces. We've got a national accreditation program. We have a carer knowledge exchange where we look at carer research and translating research into practice, and we work with carers, researchers and service providers around research. And then we often deliver some one-off different projects and things that we might be funded for. We also deliver education and training for carers and for service providers. We work across kind of all of the service systems, so mental health, disability, aged care, and often support carers to grapple with all of those different systems.
You take care of the people that are old also?
Yeah, so carers that might be ageing themselves, but also might be caring for older people. You know, you might have sons or daughters caring for parents that are ageing, but you might also have carers themselves, so family carers that are ageing themselves and also needing support with that system. They might be caring for a child, an older person with an adult child with a disability or living with a mental illness or something like that. So we have family and friend carers. We support them from all ages and caring for all different types of people that might be living with different disabilities or illness or chronic conditions, might be ageing, might be frail.
Hey, thank you for that, Lena. What is the economic benefit carers of people with disability contribute to our society?
At the moment, and with the latest statistics, there's about 3 million informal family and friend carers across Australia. In New South Wales, that equates to about 958,000 informal family carers in New South Wales. So in 2020, it was estimated by Deloitte Access Economics did a study, and they estimated that the replacement cost of the care provided by family and friend carers across the country would be around $77 billion, right? Now, those costs are probably estimated to be a bit higher now with the increasing, cost of living and wages and everything else. And I think it's also important for us to acknowledge that not everybody living with a disability would have a carer or would identify as necessarily having a carer. However, many people living with disability do receive care and assistance from a family or friend. And the 2022 ABS data study, which is the Survey of Disability, Ageing and Carers, found that around just over 75% of people living with a disability who reported needing assistance received at least some of this assistance from informal providers like family and friend carers, most commonly from a partner or from their children or from their parents. So we know that there's a lot of caring across the sector and the cost of that is expensive. And we also know that carers themselves, in the 2022 STAT survey, around 2 in 5 carers reported living with a disability themselves. So that was about 38% of people within that survey.
So you need carers on carers.
Oh, wow.
That's right. So who cares for the carers too? But I think as carers age, and part of caring often is that carers don't often look after themselves or think about themselves, because they're so focused on making sure that the person they're caring for has the best life, the best access to supports, that they often don't think about their own health and well-being needs as well.
That needs a bit of education too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
No, that's interesting. So essentially, there is support out there for people that do the caring, so carers in general. Now, thank you for that. So, Elena, how does being a carer limit their opportunities for economic and social participation?
The evidence that we look at shows us that many carers report lower levels of social and economic participation than those who aren't family and friend carers. Our recent 2024 National Carer Survey found that almost, I think, 4 in 5 respondents to the survey across Australia reported being socially isolated. So I think their caring can impact on that, because they're focusing on caring. They're not necessarily engaging with friends and other friends and family members. So the data shows that. The Survey of Disability, Ageing and Carers in 2022 also found that carers were more likely to be unemployed or underemployed than those who aren't carers. It's often not the caring role itself that limits the economic and social participation, but it's the inability often to access reliable formal or paid supports or care services, or not having a workplace that is flexible and friendly, that's being able to provide that support for carers that might be trying to balance work and care.
That really limits people.
It sure does. It sure does. Thank you for that, Elena. Well, now I'll turn our focus onto the challenges that they face and also their lived experiences. How does being a carer impact the person's sense of psychological and cognitive well-being?
As I sort of just touched on earlier, caring can have significant impact on a person's mental health and well-being. Our recent 2024 National Carer Survey found that just over 54% of carers reported low or very low well-being, and more than half, so around 53%, reported very high levels of psychological distress or stress as a result of the caring role. So it's the focus that they have when they're caring, and they're not doing other things for themselves. And that can be carers of any age and caring for anybody with any sort of condition.
That's a lot of selflessness.
There's that, but I think they're so focused on wanting to get the best for the person that they're caring for.
Yeah.
That's their focus and energy, so that can then impact them in ways that they don't necessarily acknowledge or see themselves.
And so, Elena, what is the social and emotional toll of an individual caring for a person with a long disability?
Our recent survey showed that most of the respondents had been caring for an average of around 12 years, not just caring for someone with a lifelong disability. It could be aging. It's just the sort of the general data. So most carers had been caring for just over 12 years. And some of the ongoing challenges that they experience is really accessing that adequate support across the lifespan of the person that they're caring for. So, when things change, being able to access different supports. And so that often requires ongoing advocacy from the carer if the person's unable to advocate for themselves. And that can then create some strain on carers and can impact then their social and emotional well-being. So I think it's really that the challenge with accessing long-term or ongoing support through existing service systems that can be quite complex to navigate, particularly things like the NDIS and things like that. That can be stressful and can result in stress. Often carers, sometimes if they have a physical aspect to the caring role, if they have to do a lot of lifting or, that sort of thing of the person they're caring for, that can also have physical impacts on them as well.
Thank you, Elena, for providing that insight. You may have heard of the stories of you've been through that experience. Elena, give us an insight on the sense of isolation a carer faces when faced with the prospect of caring for someone with a disability?
As we mentioned, caring can be quite isolating. Not only do carers, I suppose, experience limited time and energy for socialising due to their inability to access adequate formal supports for the person they're caring for, but many carers also report difficulty connecting with others around them due to, I suppose, society and other people's limited understanding about caring. So we know that that leads to then that sense of isolation and not knowing who to go to. Carers do, however, often report the importance of peer support and trying to connect with other carers that might be in similar circumstances or experiencing the same thing. We know particularly with all carers, but particularly with young carers, that connection with other young people that might be caring for a sibling or an adult really gives those young carers that additional support to try and reduce some of that social isolation that they often experience.
Interesting point. Thank you for sharing, Elena. Is the NDIS and the Australian Disability Strategy enough to adequately support carers?
I suppose, recent reviews of the disability sector broadly, the NDIS, and the development and review of the Australian Disability Strategy, we as an organisation and part of our systemic advocacy, Carers New South Wales, has continued to highlight that there is need for greater recognition and support for carers within these frameworks. We certainly acknowledge their importance in improving outcomes and support for people with disability, but it's important that those mechanisms also provide adequate support for carers to enable them to also have some improved outcomes and to be able to continue to provide support. Because if you support the carer, they can continue to be able to support the person that they're caring for. And I think probably since the rollout of the NDIS, carers have reported increased challenges accessing adequate ongoing respite or opportunities for carers and the people they care for to actually take a break from their informal caring arrangements, because respite's often important for both person living with a disability and the family carer to enable and facilitate ongoing personal relationships and other personal connections that they often, when they're in that caring kind of dichotomy of relationship, they're not able to experience. So I think both of those things don't necessarily adequately recognise carers within those frameworks.
Elena, what could be done better?
I think there's lots that can be done better. But I think probably recognition's the starting point, and greater recognition of the role that carers play in the lives of the people that they care for. And I think that includes measuring outcomes of carers, of people living with a disability within the services and systems to ensure that carers' needs are also being met through those services, including carers in some of the discussions about support and care. We know when carers might be taking the person that they're caring for maybe along to a medical appointment or a discussion about a plan or something like that, often the carer's needs or circumstances aren't discussed or aren't taken into account, and they're not acknowledged as part of that. So I think it's about that inclusion piece as well, particularly around some of those impacts that carers might be experiencing. So I think it's checking in with carers about how they're going. And the carers know where to find that support and assistance as well. In our recent 2024 National Carer Survey, 61% of respondents who were caring for an NDIS participant weren't actually having their needs as a carer discussed, or they weren't asked about their needs as a carer. 1 in 3 also said that their views really hadn't been taken into account through the NDIS. So, I think it's that better recognition, because then I think if you're recognising that and that carers have a role to play, then that opens up that ability for supports and better relationship and things like that as well.
You can look at it as a work setting. If you haven't got the supports, you're not going to have the best quality.
That's right. And I think also often carers, even though they do that role, sometimes don't recognise themselves as carers or identify. And the same with the service system doesn't necessarily recognise them within that. So then if they're not recognising themselves, the service system's not acknowledging or recognising them, then they don't actually go and seek support for themselves to address some of those challenges that we've talked about.
Yeah, interesting. They can also, possibly burn out and become fatigued. It's good that, there's support out there. Thank you for that, Elena. Describe the challenges of carers of people with disability in navigating government departments and supports in achieving outcomes for people with disability.
This is always a big challenge, and I think it's something that comes up in every discussion and consultation that we have with carers. So one of the most common challenges we hear is from carers, people living with a disability, is that difficulty in navigating government services and always feeling like they need to advocate, retell the story. This is what everyone, whether it's the carer or the person with a disability, retelling this story, needing to kind of advocate to access and maintain the level of support that might be being provided from service providers. So it's that telling a story, difficulty knowing where to get information. Carers also often report that not only is it difficult to find information, it takes time and energy, and you think then you've got everything kind of, you understand where to go and what's happening, and you think you've kind of nailed it, and then something will change. And so then it's about getting that additional information, adapting again. You've got to redo a plan. You've got to re-advocate for something, or something's, ended, or the system has changed again. So it's keeping up to date with all of that sort of stuff, which can be time consuming. So yeah, I think, that's some of the kind of main challenges. Look, a lot of carers have reported really positive aspects of the NDIS with access to new or additional support that they didn't have previously, but they also report high levels of frustration and distress in terms of accessing and navigating the NDIS in particular. And then I think there's carers for people who are not eligible or not able to access the NDIS. So I think with some of the limited disability-specific services and supports available in New South Wales for those not eligible for the NDIS, accessing those supports for the person that they're caring for that's not in the NDIS, like health and education and other things like that, can also be particularly challenging for carers and people living with disability.
Building on that, Elena, what help is available to families when dealing with so many government departments and services?
Yeah, look, I think it's coming to places like Carers New South Wales and other organisations like that, and service systems, particularly Carer Gateway, which I mentioned earlier, which is the national kind of one-stop shop for carers that does provide supports and information and things like that, and can provide some assistance, through coaching and peer support and other things like that for the carer around some of that assistance with navigating service systems. So Carer Gateway is kind of probably a good point of call, but also the carer organisations within every state and territory.
Thank you very much for that, Elena. We'll now move on to belonging, community, and also peer support and what that's all about. How does Carers New South Wales aim to foster a sense of peer support within the carer community?
As part of the Carer Gateway services that we deliver, peer support is a key component of that. So whether we've been delivering Carer Gateway or even before Carer Gateway came in, we have always advocated for peer support for carers and connected carers to different, peer support groups and things like that. Another way to foster that sense of peer support broadly in the community is also around sharing some of the carer stories and experiences through our publications. So, carers can read stories about other carers or some of the resources and things that we have, but also some of the events that we would hold. So particularly, obviously, recently it was Carers Week, lots of events there where carers can then connect with other carers, either in their local community or online with other carers that are in similar situations to them. So I think that's important about bringing carers together for that kind of social aspect as well. General awareness raising within the community to make sure that there's that identification of carers, and then services are coming in to provide some of that support.
I think that's a good idea that
Yeah.
they actually get communication together, because they can share different ideas and different situations that they get into, and which way is the best way to get around it. So
Yeah,
each have
absolutely.
their own ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, because I think then people then feel like, well, they're not alone. They're not the only one that's experiencing what they're experiencing, and they can, share that with other people as well, which has a really good positive benefit for the carers.
Yeah, that's what makes it rich, being able to share, those personal stories, for the benefit of others in the community. Being a carer seems a unique journey for each person. What advice do you have for carers as they navigate the evolving needs of who they support?
Yes, look, I think every caring experience is quite unique, as everybody's experience of different things is their own experience. But there are some shared experiences and feelings that I think it's important, that goes to what we were just talking about around the importance of peer support. So I think while navigating the changing needs of the person that a carer might be caring for can be challenging, it's also important that I think carers check in with themselves and reflect on their own needs and how they're going. It's really the key message is about seeking support early so that carers maintain their own health and well-being. And that enables carers to kind of, I suppose, keep their cup full so that they've got enough energy and they're, positive and okay to continue. Because if their cup's getting a bit empty, it's kind of draining on the resources and it can be hard to keep going. So I think it's making sure that they're able to do things and they've got access to supports that enable them to keep their cup full.
Is there any checklist that you've got for those carers to ask themselves to realize when they need help?
We've had lots of different resources and things, over the years. And certainly we've got sort of, wellbeing checklists. We've got some online resources around different things for carers to check in to see, what they need to do. Some suggestions around how they can get some positive outcomes or do some things for themselves. But it might be, as easy as just like a 10-minute break, putting the earpods in or whatever and going for a walk and just kind of tuning out for a minute, or just, catching up with a friend for coffee or tea or whatever else. So those kind of things around sort of well-being. But we certainly have had a number of different checklists and things like that and resources online on our website for carers to access.
Thank you, Elena. So, Elena, what are the unique contributions of carers?
Look, I think carers can provide a wide range of supports, from emotional support and checking in with the person that they're caring for to really lots of direct advocacy, coordinating services, sometimes practical assistance, sometimes, that physical personal assistance, sometimes if that's needed, sometimes domestic assistance. And carers often have significant knowledge of the person's needs and their preferences, what they like, and an understanding of what best supports the person in terms of their own safety and well-being as well. So, I think it's that unique relationship that the carer has with the person that they're caring for. And that, as we said before, that can be quite different depending on the age of the carer, the relationship, the needs of the person that they're caring for. But I think all of those contributions that carers make are unique and different depending on the situation that they're in.
Interesting. Thank you. What's the most rewarding aspect about being a carer?
Look, it can be challenging at times, but I think most carers feel very grateful for the opportunity that they have to care for the person that they care for, and whether that's a family member or friend or who that might be. I think part of the positive side of caring is it can create that sense of closeness with the person that they're caring for. It's an opportunity to, demonstrate their love in different ways for the person that they're caring for. And it also, kind of has a bit of a flow-on effect that it enables carers to develop new skills and knowledge, which can be useful for employment down the track or something like that. So I think there's, a number of things that carers find rewarding, but it depends on the individual situation, what the condition is of the person that they're caring for in terms of whether it's the mental health system that they're working with or what other supports are available. And sometimes it can also depend on those other informal supports that might be around the carer as well, around whether there's other family members, do they live close by, and I think it's about sharing some of that care as well can also be rewarding for family carers.
Interesting. What does it mean to contribute to the lives of people with disability to live an ordinary life?
I think, most carers tell us at Carers New South Wales that they just want, a good life for the person that they care for, where the person's supported to be as independent as they can be. They're able to participate in the community as well as they can with peers, that the person that they're caring for is able to achieve their own goals, and that they've got security for the future. So I think carers contribute in all of those different ways to the person that they're caring for. And I think we've seen in some of the recent inquiries into the disability sector and the Australia's disability strategy, which we mentioned before, it recognises that many carers, especially parents of children living with disability, are often the ones standing alongside them, raising concerns, advocating for better systems, services and supports to really make sure that they're creating that good life for the person that they're caring for.
Interesting. What has caring for someone else taught you about taking care, looking after yourself?
I cared sort of a bit for my parents as they were aging and that sort of thing. And I think if you're juggling work and informal care, you've got to be able just to prioritise things, make lists, tick things off, and I think you do have to look after yourself and make sure that you get a break. And I think that's the most important thing often for carers, that there is that capacity for a break, which we mentioned before. So I think that's probably one of the most important things there.
Now, look, self-care I think is very important, for anyone. Look out these.
Absolutely.
So, what are the best ways to champion and acknowledge carers of all year round?
Yeah, I think, look, it's important to recognise and acknowledge carers all year round. It's not just about Carers Week. Obviously, that's important. That has the focus on carers and it promotes it. But I think it's just about recognising the role that they play in the families that they live within and the communities that they live within, and that's important. If people know carers, it's good to reach out to carers, see how they're doing, acknowledge some of the challenges they might be experiencing. And I think if you know carers that might be not identifying as carers, to reach out and point them in the direction of where they can get support for themselves as well. And I think probably for governments and services, again, it's that recognition piece and including carers in the discussions about services and supports, recognising them as part of whether it's the NDIS, mental health system, any of those aged care systems. It's making sure that carers are identified, they have a role to play there, and just acknowledging and recognising their role and thinking about what their needs are as well as the person that they're caring for.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Elena. So before we do wrap up, tell us, Elena, what should be done now in terms of carers and provide that support? So in other words, what are your final thoughts?
I mean, it's been great to have the discussion today, and I really appreciate it. I think just sort of final thoughts really focuses back on that recognition of carers, that they recognise that they are carers and that services and the community recognise who they are, that there are supports and services available to them and that they're able to access those supports and services for themselves. And that's probably the main things and the main points that I'd like to make.
David, do you have anything you want to add?
My final thoughts are carers always are very important in society, but they got to understand that they need care too. So not to put themselves last, but all right, you can put someone else first, but always realize they need care themselves and they need to be taking care of themselves also. If they take care of themselves, they can last longer for the person that they're taking care of.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, David. John?
We need to make sure that the role of kids are always not just acknowledged but supported.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So about providing that support. Thank you, John. Thank you very much, Elena, for taking the time to join us on CripChat and talking about your carers and what it's all about and how they can be supported. We encourage, people out there to look after your carers and also make sure that the support is provided to receive the best of care.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Elena, for being on the show.
Thanks, Ibby. Thanks, David.
Jason.
Thanks, Jonathan, for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining in.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. For the viewers out there, you've been watching
watching
CripChat. You're
CripChat.
reading podcasts on everything disability. Join us next week as we talk about more issues about disability. Goodbye for now.
Thanks, guys.